The desert sun was setting over Thomas McBride's ranch, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. At 58 years old, Thomas had grown accustomed to the silence. His wife Martha had passed 5 years ago, and his grown children had long since moved to the cities, chasing dreams he couldn't quite understand. The ranch that once rang with laughter now echoed only with the lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. Thomas was a tall man, weathered by decades under the western sun, with a thick mustache that had gone more gray than brown. He wore his brown leather jacket and wide-brimmed hat like a second skin, tools of his trade that had shaped him as much as he'd worn them down. His hands were calloused, his back a bit stiffer than it used to be, but his heart remained steady and true. That September afternoon, Thomas had ridden into town for supplies. As he tied his horse outside the general store, he noticed a commotion near the saloon. A thin man with wild eyes and alcohol on his breath was dragging a young girl by the arm, shouting about needing money for drink. The girl couldn't have been more than 12 years old, with long dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a faded gray dress that had seen too many washings, and her eyes held a fear that made Thomas's chest tighten. "She's a good worker," the drunk man slurred. "Deaf as a post, but she can clean and cook. $20 and she's yours." The crowd had turned away, as crowds often do when faced with uncomfortable truths. But Thomas couldn't look away. He saw something in the girl's face that reminded him of a wounded animal, not broken but badly hurt, still holding on to a flicker of hope. Thomas approached slowly, his boots kicking up dust. "That your daughter?" he asked the drunk man, though he already knew the answer. "What's it to you, cowboy?" The man spat. "I'll give you the $20, Thomas said quietly. "But then you leave her be. You don't come looking for her. You don't ask for more money. You walk away and you don't look back." The transaction was quick and cold. Thomas counted out the bills with hands that trembled slightly. Not from age, but from anger he kept tightly controlled. When the drunk man stumbled away toward the saloon, Thomas knelt down to the girl's level. She flinched, expecting a blow. He moved his hands slowly, pointing to himself. "Thomas," he said clearly, though he didn't know if she could read lips. Then he pointed to his horse, to the road leading out of town, and finally made a gesture like laying his head on a pillow. Home, safety, rest. The girl watched him carefully. After a long moment, she nodded. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Thomas went slow, checking over his shoulder now and then to make sure she was holding on to the saddle. When they arrived, the evening star was just appearing in the darkening blue. Thomas helped her down and led her into the house. The kitchen was simple but clean. Thomas had maintained Martha's standards even in her absence. He heated up some stew and set it before the girl with a glass of milk. She ate slowly, methodically, her eyes darting to him every few moments as if expecting him to change, to become cruel. After dinner, Thomas showed her to the guest room. It had been his daughter Sarah's room once, with a quilt Martha had stitched in patterns of blue and white. He gestured that this was her space now. The girl touched the quilt gently as if it might disappear. In the days that followed, Thomas learned to communicate through simple gestures and patient repetition. He learned that her name was Emma. She was indeed a hard worker, rising before dawn to help with breakfast, tending the small vegetable garden, feeding the chickens. But Thomas noticed something that troubled him. Whenever he dropped something, a pan, a tool, Emma would startle and turn toward the sound. When the rooster crowed at dawn, she'd stir and wake. When Thomas called to his cattle, she'd glance in his direction. 3 weeks after bringing Emma home, Thomas was in the barn repairing a saddle. Emma was sweeping the yard outside. Thomas began to hum an old hymn Martha used to love, one about amazing grace and sweet sounds. He saw Emma freeze, the broom still in her hands. Then slowly, very slowly, she turned toward the barn. Thomas stepped into the doorway and met her eyes. He hummed again, louder this time. Emma's face transformed. Fear melted into confusion. Confusion into something that looked almost like relief. That evening, Thomas wrote out words on paper. "Can you hear me?" He printed in large letters. Emma's hands shook as she picked up the pencil. Her writing was unpracticed but clear. Sometimes. Little bit. "Father said I was deaf. Said I was worthless. Hit me when I heard things and told him. Said I was lying. Thomas felt his throat tighten. He wrote back, "You are not worthless. You are not a liar. You hear what you hear. That's the truth." Over the following months, Thomas took Emma to a doctor in the larger town 2 counties over. The doctor explained that Emma had partial hearing loss, probably from an illness when she was younger. She could hear some sounds, especially louder ones, but her father had convinced her she was completely deaf. When she'd responded to sounds as a small child, he'd beaten her for pretending and seeking attention. So Emma had learned to hide what she could hear to survive. The human spirit is a remarkable thing, the doctor told Thomas as they stood in the hallway. She adapted to what she needed to be to stay safe. Now she has the chance to discover who she really is. The ranch began to change. Thomas found himself talking more, humming while he worked, playing the old radio Martha had loved. Emma slowly began to respond, at first with just a smile or a nod, then with a word here and there. Her voice was rusty from disuse, but it grew stronger. Thomas taught her to read properly, spending evenings by lamplight with books from Martha's collection. Emma devoured them, Little Women, Tom Sawyer, collections of poetry. She asked questions about everything, hungry for a world she'd been denied. One spring morning, nearly a year after Thomas had brought Emma home, they were sitting on the porch, watching the sunrise. The desert was coming alive with color, and birds were singing their morning songs. "Thomas?" Emma said quietly. It still surprised him every time she spoke, like a gift renewed. "Yes, Emma. Why did you help me that day?" "You didn't know me. You didn't know if I could work or if I'd be trouble." Thomas was quiet for a moment, watching a hawk circle high above. "My Martha used to say that life gives us chances to be who we really are. Most days we're just going through the motions, but every now and then we get a moment where we have to choose, step forward or step back. I saw you that day and I thought about how I'd want someone to see my own daughter. If she needed help." He paused. "Besides, this old ranch has been too quiet. It needed life in it again." Emma smiled, that rare, full smile that lit up her whole face. "It's not quiet anymore." "No," Thomas agreed. "It surely isn't." 2 years after that dusty day in town, Thomas stood in the same porch watching Emma drive off in the wagon. She was heading to the schoolhouse in town, not as a student anymore, but as an assistant teacher. The schoolmaster had been impressed by her reading and her gentle way with the younger children, especially those who struggled. Thomas felt his age in his bones that morning, but his heart was light. The ranch would always be here, and Emma would always have a home. But she was finding her own path now, and that was exactly as it should be. Sometimes kindness is loud, a grand gesture, a heroic rescue. But more often, Thomas thought, it's quiet. It's choosing to see someone when others look away. It's offering shelter, patience, and time. It's believing in someone until they can believe in themselves. The morning wind carried the sound of Emma's laughter back to him as she waved goodbye. Thomas raised his hand in return, then headed back inside to start his day. There was work to be done, there was always work to be done. But now there was also hope and purpose, and the knowledge that Martha would have been proud. The ranch wasn't silent anymore. It was filled with the sound of a life being lived, a heart being healed, and kindness echoing forward into tomorrow.